and Christian M. McShaffrey. These are Reformed Calvinists. Some are Reformed Baptists. The book is Why I Preach from the Received Text, an anthology of essays by Reformed ministers. Now, remember, they're Calvinists, they're Reformed. Some are Reformed Baptists like James White. If you go back, yesterday's session and previous sessions, I explained there is now a growing movement. It's related to Bibles, Bible versions, Bible preservation, among Reformed Christians who want to go back to what they call the ecclesiastical text. Okay, you guys ready to learn? Please, no distractions, guys. Ecclesiastical text. Yep, Mr. Decker's worth getting. The ecclesiastical text is the text of the Reformers, meaning the family of Greek manuscripts that God preserved and allowed the church to have access to, which would be the same manuscripts that the Reformers had access to, like John Owen, right? Francis Turretin, and the manuscripts that God in his providence gave to the church, the manuscripts that the church had access to. These manuscripts are called the majority text, the Byzantine text, the Byzantine text type. Now, if you're not familiar with textual criticism, I'm no scholar, but I've listened to enough of them. They divide manuscripts into different families. You have the Alexandrian text type, meaning those manuscripts that read similarly the same way to the papyri found in Alexandria, Egypt. So that would be called the Alexandrian text type. Now, they're revising this, and they want to get rid of these classifications. So you with me so far? May the Spirit save me from error and enable me to recall the facts clearly and correct me on the spot. I don't want to be mistaken. So you with me? If you listen to Bart Ehrman and Daniel Wallace, James White, they will talk about family trees or lines of textual transmission. The papyri, some of which was found in Alexandria, Egypt, and those other copies that agree with the readings in these copies found in Alexandria, Egypt. So they classify them as Alexandrian text type. Then you have the Western texts, those manuscripts that would be in the West and virtually in Latin, right? Then you have the later bulk of the Greek copies of the New Testament. They are later, but they have more of them. So about, let's say, if you have 5,300 plus copies of the books of the New Testament in Greek, over 5,000 of them would be classified as the majority text. Why? Because they're the majority. They start appearing later on. They are in the majority, and they have a higher degree of agreement. So over 5,000 of the copies are called Byzantine text or majority text. From that came the received text, which result in the King James. Are you with me there? Are you listening before I move on? The reason why it's called the Byzantine text, because these were copies that were produced by Byzantine monks, the Byzantine Empire, and Byzantine monks would have been responsible for the production of these copies. And over 5,000 of the copies of the New Testament in Greek are from this family line called the majority text, the Byzantine text. And that family of manuscripts have a higher degree of uniformity. They agree more often than the earlier papyri. They agree more often than do Codex Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, and the early papyri, the papyri that was only found in the 19th century. So far with me, guys? I'm trying to be as accurate as possible. If I'm a mistake, it's unintentional. May the Spirit correct me on the spot. So you guys got it? Everyone got it? Before I move on to the next point. The official line of manuscript tradition, the official family of manuscripts that the Orthodox Church follows. If you're Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, the official Greek transmission that the Orthodox Church endorses is the Byzantine text. They do not follow modern textual critics like Daniel Wallace, James White. They follow the majority text, the Byzantine text, from which we get the received text that result in the King James. Did you know that? This is why in the Orthodox Study Bible, I have it in my library and I have it as a PDF file. The New Testament they use is the New King James Version. This is why I've been to Orthodox churches where I've seen in the pew, if you can call it a pew, New King James or King James. So the Orthodox Church only endorses the Byzantine text, the majority text, and they only endorse English translations such as King James and New King James. Are you with me? Focus, 60-second Baptist. This is why instead of producing their own English translation of the New Testament, they went with the New King James Bible, but they provided a fresh translation of the Greek versions of the Old Testament called the Septuagint, because the Orthodox Church does not endorse the Masoretic text, the Hebrew family of manuscripts produced by the Masoretes, 500s onwards. They don't endorse the Hebrew, they endorse the Greek versions of the Old Testament called the Septuagint. So if you have an Orthodox study Bible, you're going to see the English translation of the Old Testament is based on the Greek versions. That's why there are differences. No, New Revised Standard Version. It's a liberal translation produced by a committee of liberals, some of whom are atheists. Are you with me so far? May the Spirit anoint me to speak truth clearly without error. What am I getting at? Because the majority text was the text that was in usage, that the church had access to during the Reformation, along with the Latin Vulgate. Because remember, the theological language of the West became Latin. So that's why Jerome produced what's called the Latin Vulgate, produced in around the 400s, and that became the official translation for the Latin-speaking churches. But for the Orthodox Church, remember, Orthodox Catholic were one until the schism, it would have been the Greek texts, and it would have been primarily the majority text. So when the Reformers wanted to study the Bible in original languages and translate, they had the majority text, the Byzantine text, from which came the received text, right? Textus Receptus, which resulted in the production of the King James Bible. So far you're getting this, right? Before I move on. You with me so far? Because I'm going slow. This is a class we want to learn. Okay, so now Reformed Calvinists want to go back to their roots, and they're admitting to you that their roots go no further than the Reformation. So they look to the Reformers, John Owen, John Calvin, Francis Turretin, others, and they see that the Reformers believe that the original words of the original autographs of the biblical books were preserved in those family of manuscripts that the church had access to. So they were convinced every original wording that God inspired through the original authors preserved in those Greek manuscripts called the majority text, from which we get the received text. So now these Calvinists want to go back to the received text. And because they believe that the King James Bible is a faithful translation of the received text, they choose to endorse the King James Bible and decry modern versions. They're not King James onlyists. They don't just believe the King James is the perfect translation. They prefer the King James because the King James is based on the very Greek manuscripts that Reformers believe were those manuscripts that God preserved the original wording.